Have you ever been judged so harshly by your appearance that it made you question everything about yourself? Have you ever walked into a place where you should have been welcomed, only to be treated like you were invisible? Like you were nothing more than dirt on someone's expensive shoe? Let me tell you about the day that changed everything for me, the day I learned the most painful lesson about human nature, and the day I decided that enough was enough. This isn't just a story about revenge or proving someone wrong. This is a story about dignity, about self-worth, and about the invisible barriers we create between each other based on nothing more than superficial judgments. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what happened to me could happen to anyone, and maybe, just maybe, it has happened to you too. I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine walking into a place where luxury drips from every corner, where the air itself seems to cost money, where everything sparkles and shines so bright it almost hurts your eyes. Now imagine walking into that place wearing your most comfortable clothes, the ones that have seen better days, the ones that tell the story of your real life, not the Instagram version of it. That's exactly what I did on a Tuesday afternoon that started like any other, but ended up becoming a turning point in my life. I had just finished a long week of work, the kind of work that leaves you exhausted, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally drained. I'm talking about the kind of tired where your bones ache and your soul feels heavy. I had been working on a project that consumed every waking hour, meeting deadlines that seemed impossible, solving problems that would have made most people give up. But I didn't give up because that's not who I am. I've never been someone who takes the easy road, and I've certainly never been someone who judges my worth or anyone else's worth by the clothes they wear or the car they drive. I was raised by a mother who taught me that character matters more than appearance, that kindness costs nothing, and that treating people with respect is not optional, it's mandatory. She would tell me stories about her own life, about times when she was dismissed and underestimated, and how she always chose to rise above it with grace. I carried those lessons with me like a shield, believing that if I treated others well, the world would treat me well in return. How naive I was. How completely unprepared I was for what was about to happen. That Tuesday, I decided to treat myself. After weeks of grueling work, of sacrificing sleep and social life, of pushing myself to limits I didn't know I had, I wanted to do something nice for myself. I had been eyeing this particular store for months, a high-end boutique that sold items I had admired from afar. I'm not talking about just any store. This was the kind of place where celebrities shop, where people fly in from other countries just to browse, where a single purchase could equal someone's monthly rent. But I had earned this moment. I had worked hard, and I had the means to buy whatever I wanted. The problem was, I didn't look like I had the means. I was wearing my favorite worn-in jeans, the ones with a small tear at the knee that I actually liked because it made them more comfortable. I had on a simple t-shirt, nothing fancy, nothing designer, just a plain shirt that I had thrown on that morning when comfort was my only priority. My shoes were sneakers that had walked countless miles, that had been with me through hiking trails and city streets, through rain and sunshine. My hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail because I hadn't felt like doing anything elaborate. I wore no makeup because my skin needed to breathe after weeks of early mornings and late nights. I looked, to put it simply, ordinary. I looked like someone who had just rolled out of bed and decided to run errands. I looked like someone who definitely did not belong in a luxury boutique. But here's the thing that nobody seemed to understand. Looking ordinary doesn't mean being ordinary, and looking poor doesn't mean being poor. I pushed open the heavy glass door of the boutique, and immediately I was hit with that distinctive smell of expensive retail, that mixture of leather and perfume and money. The air conditioning was set to that perfect temperature where you forget it's scorching hot outside. The lighting was soft and flattering, designed to make everything look more beautiful than it actually was. Classical music played softly in the background, the kind that makes you feel like you should be sipping champagne at an art gallery. The floors were so polished I could see my reflection in them, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of myself and understood exactly how I must have looked to everyone else in that store. But I walked in anyway, my head held high, because I had every right to be there. I had money in my bank account, a credit card in my wallet, and a desire to purchase something beautiful for myself. Isn't that what these stores want? Customers who can afford their products? Or so I thought. The first sign that something was wrong came within seconds of entering. There were 3 sales associates in the store, all impeccably dressed in black suits that probably cost more than most people's cars. One was helping a woman draped in designer labels from head to toe, practically bowing as he showed her various handbags. Another was arranging items on a display, moving each piece with the kind of reverence usually reserved for museum artifacts. The third, A woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine with her perfectly styled hair and makeup that probably took an hour to apply, looked up when I entered. Our eyes met for just a second, and in that second, I saw it. That look, that flicker of judgment that passed across her face so quickly that if I had blinked, I might have missed it. But I didn't miss it. I saw the way her eyes traveled from my face down to my shoes and back up again, taking in every aspect of my appearance and finding it lacking. I saw the way her expression shifted from professional neutrality to something that looked almost like disgust. I saw the way she then deliberately turned away, as if I wasn't worth even the basic acknowledgement that I had entered the store. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that maybe she was just focused on her task, that maybe she hadn't actually seen me, that maybe I was being too sensitive after a long week of stress. So I started browsing, walking slowly through the store, running my fingers along the fabrics, admiring the craftsmanship of items that were clearly made with care and skill. I picked up a beautiful scarf, silk that felt like water in my hands, with a pattern that reminded me of something my mother would have loved. I was examining it, thinking about how nice it would look, when I heard a voice behind me. The voice was sharp, cold, completely devoid of the warmth that I had heard this same woman using with other customers. She said, and I will never forget these exact words, "Excuse me, those items are very expensive. Perhaps you would be more comfortable shopping somewhere else." I froze. Did I hear that correctly? Did this woman actually just suggest that I leave because she assumed I couldn't afford to shop there? I turned around slowly, still holding the scarf, and looked at her directly. She was standing with her arms crossed, her face set in an expression that made it clear she saw me as a problem to be dealt with, an unwanted presence in her pristine store. Have you ever felt your face get hot with embarrassment and anger at the same time? Have you ever felt your heart start racing not from fear but from the sheer injustice of a situation? That's exactly what happened to me in that moment. My hands started shaking slightly, and I had to take a deep breath before I could even speak. I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm just looking at this scarf. Is there a problem?" She didn't even try to hide her contempt. She said, "Yes, actually there is. We have very strict policies about handling merchandise, and quite frankly, you don't look like someone who is seriously shopping here. We've had problems with people coming in just to take photos for social media or to waste our time when they have no intention of making a purchase." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked around the store, at the other customers who were touching items, picking things up, trying things on, and none of them were being questioned. The only difference between me and them was how we were dressed. That's it. That's the only factor that determined whether I was a welcome customer or an unwanted intruder. I felt something break inside me in that moment. Not break like shatter, but break like a dam bursting, releasing all the emotions I had been holding back. I thought about all the times in my life when I had been underestimated, all the times people had made assumptions about me based on superficial factors, all the times I had smiled and walked away instead of standing up for myself. I thought about my mother's advice to always take the high road, but I also thought about another piece of advice she had given me. Never let anyone make you feel small. I put the scarf back carefully on its display and said, "I understand you have policies, and I respect that. But I came here to shop, not to be profiled and discriminated against based on my appearance." The woman's eyes widened slightly, as if she was surprised I had the audacity to challenge her. But then her expression hardened even more. She said, "I'm not discriminating against anyone. I'm simply being realistic about who our customers are, who their customers are." As if she could determine who belonged in that store and who didn't based on a glance. As if the worth of a person could be measured by the brand of their jeans or the newness of their shoes. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and fierce, but I also felt something else. I felt a strange sense of calm, a clarity that cut through all the emotion. Because in that moment, I made a decision. I decided that I was going to show this woman and everyone else in that store exactly who I was and what I was capable of. Not because I needed to prove anything to them, but because I needed to prove something to myself. I needed to prove that I wouldn't be pushed around, that I wouldn't accept being treated as less than human, that my dignity was not for sale at any price. I looked at her and said, "I'd like to speak to the manager, please." She actually laughed. A short, dismissive laugh that made it clear she thought I was making an empty threat, that she thought I would give up and leave like she wanted me to. She said, "The manager is very busy with important clients. Perhaps you should just leave and save us all some time." But I didn't leave. I stood there, my feet planted firmly on that polished floor, my eyes never leaving hers, and I repeated, "I would like to speak to the manager. Now." The tension in the store had become palpable, and I noticed that the other sales associate who had been arranging displays had stopped what he was doing and was watching our interaction with poorly concealed interest. The woman who had been shopping with the third associate had also paused, her conversation trailing off as she turned to see what the commotion was about. I could feel their eyes on me, could feel the judgment rolling off them in waves, but I refused to back down. The sales associate in front of me, whose name tag I finally noticed read Melissa, let out an exaggerated sigh that made it clear she thought dealing with me was beneath her. She pulled out her phone and sent what I assumed was a text message, her manicured nails clicking against the screen with sharp, irritated movements. She didn't say anything to me, didn't acknowledge my request beyond that sigh, just stood there with her arms crossed again, as if she was a security guard making sure I didn't steal anything rather than a sales associate whose job was supposedly to help customers. The wait felt eternal. Every second that ticked by felt like an hour. I could feel sweat starting to form on the back of my neck despite the air conditioning, not from heat, but from the adrenaline coursing through my body. My mind was racing with thoughts I couldn't quite organize. Part of me wanted to just leave, to walk out of that store and never come back, to forget this whole humiliating experience and shop somewhere else where I would be treated with basic human decency. But another part of me, a stronger part, knew that walking away would haunt me forever. It would be another moment of backing down, another time when I let someone else's prejudice determine my actions, another chip away at my self-respect. I had spent so much of my life trying to be accommodating, trying to avoid conflict, trying to make other people comfortable even when they made me deeply uncomfortable. Where had that gotten me? Standing in a luxury store, being treated like a criminal, because I had the audacity to dress comfortably on my day off. I thought about all the stories I had heard from friends and family members about similar experiences. My best friend Maya had told me about being followed around a department store by security when she was shopping for her sister's birthday gift. My cousin David had shared his experience of being ignored for 20 minutes in a car dealership while the salespeople fell over themselves to help a white customer who walked in after him. These weren't isolated incidents. This was a pattern, a systemic problem of judgment and discrimination that happened every single day to countless people, and it was happening to me right now. Finally, after what must have been 5 or 6 minutes but felt like an eternity, a door at the back of the store opened, and a man in an expensive-looking suit walked out. He was probably in his mid-50s, with silver hair styled perfectly, and a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than a year of my rent. He had that air of authority that comes from being in charge, that confidence that comes from never having been made to feel unwelcome anywhere. He approached with a professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and I could already tell that he had been briefed by Melissa and had formed his opinion about the situation before even hearing my side. He extended his hand to me in a gesture that seemed more performative than genuine and said, "Good afternoon. I'm Richard, the store manager. I understand there's been some sort of misunderstanding. As if what had happened was just a simple mix-up rather than blatant discrimination. I shook his hand firmly, making sure my grip was strong and confident, and said, "There's no misunderstanding. Your employee made it very clear that she believes I don't belong in this store based solely on my appearance. She suggested I leave and shop somewhere else, and she's been hostile and dismissive from the moment I walked in." Richard's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. He glanced at Melissa, who immediately jumped in with her version of events. She said, her voice dripping with fake concern, "Mr. Richardson, I was simply following our protocols. We've had issues recently with people who come in without serious purchasing intent, and I was trying to protect our merchandise and ensure the comfort of our actual paying customers." Actual paying customers. The implication was crystal clear. I wasn't a real customer. I was some kind of pretender who needed to be weeded out. Richard nodded slowly, as if he was considering her words carefully, but I could see in his eyes that he had already decided to take her side. He turned back to me and said, in a tone that was clearly meant to be conciliatory but came across as condescending, "I'm sure you can understand that we run a high-end establishment here, and we do need to maintain certain standards. Perhaps there was a miscommunication, but I'm sure you can appreciate the position my staff is in. Certain standards. Maintain. Appreciate. All code words for, you don't fit in here, and we want you to leave." I felt my jaw clench, felt that anger that had been simmering start to boil, but I kept my voice calm, controlled, because I knew that showing emotion would only confirm their prejudices about me. I said, "So let me get this straight. You're telling me that your store policy is to judge customers by their clothing and make assumptions about their purchasing power based on their appearance? That's what you're saying?" Richard's face tightened. He clearly didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone he had already dismissed as unworthy of his time. He said, "I'm saying that my employees use their best judgment to provide service to our clientele, and sometimes that means making assessments about who is genuinely interested in our products." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, standing in a store where I had every intention and every ability to spend thousands of dollars, being told that I wasn't their type of customer. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I reached into my bag slowly, making sure every movement was deliberate and clear because I didn't want to give them any excuse to claim I was doing anything threatening. I pulled out my wallet, not the fancy designer wallet that I owned but never used because I found it impractical, but my regular wallet that was worn and comfortable and functional. Richard and Melissa both watched me with expressions that ranged from confusion to concern, probably wondering what I was doing. I opened my wallet and pulled out a credit card. Not just any credit card. My black card. The kind that you don't apply for. The kind that you get invited to have. The kind that has no spending limit and comes with concierge services and priority treatment everywhere you go. The kind that signals to anyone who knows anything about financial services that the person holding it has significant wealth. I held it up so both of them could see it clearly, and I watched as understanding slowly dawned on their faces. The color drained from Melissa's face so quickly it would have been comical if the situation wasn't so infuriating. Her mouth literally dropped open slightly, and she looked like someone had just told her the world was ending. Richard's professional composure cracked for just a moment, and I saw genuine shock flash across his features before he tried to cover it with that fake smile again. But it was too late. The damage was done. They had shown me exactly who they were, and now they were seeing exactly who I was. I said, my voice steady and clear, "This is a Centurion card from American Express. Do you know what someone needs to have in their account to qualify for one of these? Do you know what kind of annual spending is required? Let me enlighten you. You need to spend at least $500,000 a year on their regular platinum card before you even get considered for an invitation to this one. And that invitation only comes if you have a net worth in the millions. So when you tell me that I don't look like your typical customer, what you're really saying is that you and your employee judged me based on my clothing, made assumptions about my wealth based on superficial appearances, and decided that I wasn't worthy of basic respect and service." The silence that followed my words was deafening. I could hear the classical music still playing softly in the background, could hear the gentle hum of the air conditioning, but no one spoke. Richard looked like he was trying to calculate the fastest way to recover from this situation, his mind probably racing through corporate training on customer service failures and discrimination lawsuits. Melissa looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. The other two sales associates who had been pretending not to listen were now openly staring. And the customer who had been shopping had stopped even pretending to look at handbags. I continued, because now that I had started, I couldn't stop. Years of being underestimated, years of being judged, years of taking the high road and swallowing my pride all came pouring out. I said, "Do you want to know who I am? Do you want to know what I do? I'm a tech entrepreneur. I started my own software company 8 years ago from my apartment with nothing but a laptop and an idea. I worked 80-hour weeks for years. I sacrificed relationships, sleep, health, everything to build something from nothing, and I succeeded. My company now employs over 200 people and generates tens of millions in annual revenue. I've been featured in Forbes, Inc. magazine, and TechCrunch. I've spoken at conferences around the world. I've invested in startups that have gone on to become household names. But today, on my day off, when I wanted to treat myself to something nice after weeks of stressful work, I decided to dress comfortably. I decided that my worth wasn't determined by whether I was wearing designer clothes or carrying a luxury handbag. I decided to just be myself. And your store, your employee, and you as a manager decided that being myself meant I wasn't good enough to shop here." Richard finally found his voice and he started stammering out what was clearly going to be an apology, but I held up my hand to stop him. I wasn't finished yet. I said, "I came here planning to spend at least $10,000 today. I was going to buy gifts for my employees who have been working just as hard as I have. I was going to buy something special for my mother who taught me never to judge people by their appearance. I was going to buy that scarf I was looking at, and probably several others like it. But now I'm going to take my money, my black card, and my considerable purchasing power somewhere else. Somewhere where they understand that customers come in all shapes, sizes, and clothing choices. Somewhere where basic human decency isn't conditional on how expensive your outfit is." I turned to leave, putting my credit card back in my wallet with deliberate slowness, making sure they could see exactly what they were losing. But before I could take more than 2 steps toward the door, Richard practically lunged forward. his professional composure completely abandoned now. His voice was urgent, almost desperate, as he said, "Wait, please, wait. I sincerely apologize for this terrible experience. This is absolutely not how we treat our valued customers, and I assure you this is not representative of our store's values or policies." I stopped and turned back to face him, my eyebrows raised. Valued customers. Funny how quickly I had gone from being someone they wanted to throw out to being a valued customer, all because of a piece of plastic in my wallet. I didn't say anything, just waited for him to continue, and I could see him squirming under my gaze. He continued, words tumbling out faster now. "Please, allow me to make this right. I want to personally assist you with your shopping today. Everything in the store is 20% off for you, and I'll throw in complimentary gift wrapping and delivery for any purchases." Melissa clearly made a terrible error in judgment, and I can assure you she will be receiving additional training on proper customer service. I glanced at Melissa, who was now looking at the floor. Her earlier confidence and superiority completely evaporated. Part of me felt a small twinge of sympathy for her. She was probably just someone following what she thought were the unspoken rules of luxury retail, the prejudices that had been passed down to her by managers and colleagues, the classism that was baked into the very structure of high-end shopping. But then I remembered the look of disgust on her face when I had walked in, remembered the coldness in her voice when she suggested I leave, and that sympathy disappeared. Actions have consequences, and today she was learning that lesson the hard way. I looked back at Richard and said, 20% off? You think a discount is what this is about? You think you can buy your way out of discrimination? He backtracked immediately, his face getting red. No, of course not. I just wanted to show our appreciation and apologize in a tangible way. Please tell me what I can do to make this right. And there it was. The real question. What could make this right? What could possibly compensate for being made to feel like garbage, for being judged and dismissed and treated as less than human? I stood there for a moment, really thinking about it, and I realized something important. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every person who had ever been made to feel unwelcome in a place where they had every right to be. This was about every person who had been judged by their appearance, their accent, their perceived social class. This was about sending a message that this kind of behavior was not acceptable, would not be tolerated, and had real consequences. Have you ever been in a position where you had the power to really make someone understand the impact of their actions? Have you ever had the opportunity to turn a moment of personal hurt into something that might create actual change? That's where I was. I could have just walked away, taking my business elsewhere and leaving them to continue their discriminatory practices with the next person who walked through the door. Or I could do something more. I took a deep breath and said, "Here's what's going to make this right. First, I want you to understand that I'm not upset because I didn't get good service. I'm upset because your employee made assumptions about me based solely on how I was dressed. She saw my comfortable clothes and torn jeans and decided I was not worthy of basic respect. That's not just bad customer service. That's discrimination, and it's completely unacceptable." Richard nodded vigorously, clearly eager to agree with anything I said at this point. I continued, "Second, I want to know what your store is going to do to ensure this doesn't happen to someone else. Because here's the thing you need to understand. I have the resources to speak up, to demand an apology, to walk away and spend my money elsewhere without it affecting my life one bit. But what about the person who doesn't have a black card to wave around? What about the young person saving up for months to buy their first luxury item, who walks in here nervous and excited only to be treated like they don't belong? What about the person who doesn't have the confidence or the position to demand better treatment? They're the ones who suffer in silence, who leave feeling smaller and less worthy, who internalize the message that they don't belong in certain spaces." The store had gone completely quiet. Even the classical music seemed to have faded into the background. The other customer had given up all pretense of shopping and was openly listening now, her expression thoughtful. The sales associates who had been watching from a distance had moved closer, clearly hanging on every word. Richard looked genuinely uncomfortable now, shifting his weight from foot to foot, and I could see that my words were hitting home in a way that made him realize this was bigger than just one unhappy customer. He said, his voice much quieter now, "You're absolutely right. This is unacceptable, and it speaks to a larger issue that we need to address. I will personally commit to implementing new training programs for all our staff on unconscious bias and proper customer service, regardless of a customer's appearance. I will also review our hiring and training practices to ensure we're creating an inclusive environment for all customers." I nodded slowly. It was a start, at least. But I wasn't quite done yet. I said, "Third, I want you to know that I will be sharing this experience. I have a platform. I speak at events, I'm active on social media, I write articles about entrepreneurship and business culture. This story, this moment right here, is going to be part of those conversations. Not to shame your store specifically, though honestly you deserve it, but to highlight a broader problem in luxury retail and in society in general. We have got to stop judging people's worth by their appearance. We have got to stop creating spaces where only certain people are made to feel welcome. We have got to do better. My voice had risen slightly with passion, and I had to take another breath to steady myself. I could feel emotions threatening to overwhelm me, years of frustration and hurt bubbling up to the surface. But I maintained my composure because I needed to finish this, needed to make my point completely clear. Richard was nodding again, looking like he wanted to say something, but I held up my hand one more time. I said, and fourth, regarding Melissa here, I don't want her fired. This seemed to surprise everyone, including Melissa, whose head snapped up to look at me with an expression of shock and confusion. I continued, I don't want her fired because firing her doesn't solve the problem. It just makes her someone else's problem. What I want is for her to really understand why what she did was wrong. I want her to think about how she made me feel, and I want her to commit to never making anyone else feel that way. I want her to be part of the solution, not just another person who lost their job and learned nothing from the experience. I turned to look directly at Melissa, who was now standing very still, her eyes wide and somewhat watery. I could see that she was on the verge of tears, whether from embarrassment, fear of consequences, or genuine remorse. I couldn't tell. But I needed to say this to her directly, face to face, human to human. I said, keeping my voice firm but not cruel, Melissa, I need you to understand something. When you looked at me today and decided I didn't belong here, you weren't just making a business decision or following some protocol. You were telling me that my value as a person could be determined by the clothes I chose to wear on my day off. You were saying that people like me who prioritize comfort over fashion, who don't feel the need to dress up to prove their worth, don't deserve to be treated with basic respect and courtesy. Do you understand how deeply hurtful that is? Melissa opened her mouth, closed it, then finally managed to whisper, I'm so sorry. I really am. I thought, I've been trained to look for certain signs. I interrupted her gently. You've been trained to look for certain signs of what? Wealth? Class? Belonging? And what are those signs supposed to be? Expensive clothes, designer labels, the right haircut, the perfect makeup? Do you realize how shallow and discriminatory that training is? Do you realize that you're essentially profiling people based on classist stereotypes? She nodded, a single tear rolling down her perfectly made-up cheek. I do now. I never thought about it that way. I never imagined that I could make someone feel so unwelcome and disrespected. I just thought I was doing my job, protecting the store's interests. But I see now that I was wrong. Completely wrong. There was something in her voice that made me believe she was being genuine, that this wasn't just a performance to save her job, but a real moment of recognition and regret. I said, my voice softening slightly, then learn from this. Change your approach. When someone walks into this store, see them as a human being first, not as a potential sales commission or a potential problem. Treat everyone with the same courtesy and respect you would want to be treated with. Because let me tell you something. Some of the wealthiest people I know dress like they're about to mow their lawn. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs I work with wear the same hoodie and jeans to every meeting. Appearance means nothing. Character means everything. The store remained silent for a moment after my words, and I could feel the weight of them settling over everyone present. This was a teaching moment, a chance for real change, and I hoped desperately that it would stick, that it wouldn't just be forgotten as soon as I walked out the door. Richard cleared his throat and said, I want to thank you for handling this situation with such grace and for giving us the opportunity to learn and improve. Your points about systemic issues in luxury retail are well taken, and I promise you we will implement real changes. Would you be willing to give us another chance? Not today if you're not comfortable, but perhaps you could come back another time and allow us to show you the level of service you deserve today? I considered his offer for a moment. Part of me wanted to say no, to take my business elsewhere permanently, and never look back. But another part of me recognized that change only happens when we engage, when we give people the opportunity to learn and grow from their mistakes. Walking away felt good in the moment, but staying engaged might actually make a difference. I said, I'll think about it, but understand that trust, once broken, is very difficult to rebuild. If I do come back, it won't be because of discounts or special treatment. It will be because I believe that something meaningful has changed here. Richard nodded solemnly, and I could see in his eyes that he understood the gravity of what I was saying. This wasn't just about one lost sale or one unhappy customer. This was about the reputation of his store, about the culture he was fostering, about whether his business would be on the right side of history when it came to treating all people with dignity and respect. I finally allowed myself to relax slightly, the adrenaline that had been coursing through my body for the past 20 minutes starting to ebb. My hands were still shaking a little, and I could feel the emotional exhaustion starting to set in. Confrontation has never been easy for me, even when it's justified, even when it's necessary. My mother's voice echoed in my head with her old advice about taking the high road, but I heard a new interpretation of it now. Taking the high road doesn't mean staying silent in the face of injustice. It means speaking your truth with dignity, demanding better while remaining true to your values. As I turned to leave for real this time, I took one last look around the store. The other customer, the one who had been shopping when I arrived, approached me hesitantly. She was an older woman, probably in her 60s, wearing an elegant outfit that screamed old money and established wealth. She said to me, her voice warm and sincere, "I want you to know that I heard everything, and you're absolutely right. I'm ashamed to say that I've probably benefited from the same prejudices that hurt you today, never even questioning why I always get such attentive service in places like this. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for not just walking away quietly. You've given me a lot to think about." Her words surprised me and touched me deeply. Here was someone who could have just stayed silent, could have gone about her shopping without getting involved, but instead chose to acknowledge what had happened and express support. I smiled at her, feeling some of the anger and hurt start to transform into something else, something that felt almost like hope. I said, "Thank you for saying that. And thank you for listening with an open mind. That's all any of us can do, right? Listen, learn, and try to do better." She nodded and squeezed my hand gently before returning to her shopping. I walked out of that store into the afternoon sunshine, and the contrast between the air-conditioned interior and the warm air outside felt symbolic somehow, like I was stepping from one world into another. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing, just processing everything that had happened. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably work emails piling up as they always did, but I ignored it for now. This moment deserved my full attention. I thought about all the complex emotions I was feeling. There was still anger, yes, burning hot and righteous. There was hurt, deep and personal, the kind that comes from being made to feel less than worthy. There was frustration at the systemic nature of the problem, at the knowledge that what happened to me happens to countless others every single day. But there was also something else. There was pride. Pride that I had stood up for myself, that I had used my voice and my privilege to speak truth to power. There was satisfaction in knowing that I had handled the situation with dignity rather than stooping to their level. And there was hope, fragile but real, that maybe my words would actually make a difference, that maybe the next person who walked into that store dressed casually would be treated with respect. Have you ever felt completely drained but also somehow energized at the same time? That's exactly how I felt as I started walking down the street, away from the store, away from the confrontation, toward whatever came next. I walked for blocks without any real destination in mind, just needing to move, needing to process. The city streets were busy with afternoon shoppers and tourists, people going about their lives completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. I passed other luxury stores, their windows displaying items that cost more than some people make in a year, and I wondered how many other customers had experiences like mine, how many people had been judged and dismissed and made to feel small. I thought about my journey to get to this point in my life. Growing up, my family wasn't poor, but we certainly weren't wealthy either. My parents worked hard to provide for me and my siblings, but there were months when money was tight, when we had to make choices between things that other families took for granted. I remember my mother darning socks because buying new ones wasn't in the budget. I remember my father working 2 jobs during busy seasons so we could afford school supplies and the occasional treat. I remembered being acutely aware of class differences from a young age, noticing how some of my classmates had brand new backpacks every year while mine lasted until it literally fell apart, seeing how certain kids got invited to exclusive birthday parties at country clubs while others of us celebrated at local parks. But my parents never let us feel less than anyone else. They instilled in us a sense of dignity and worth that had nothing to do with material possessions. They taught us that respect is earned through character, through how you treat others, through the content of your soul rather than the contents of your wallet. As I grew older and started my business, as success came and the money started flowing in, I made a conscious decision not to let wealth change who I was at my core. I bought a nice house, yes, because I wanted space and comfort. I invested in quality items that would last. But I didn't fall into the trap of equating my worth with my net worth, of believing that expensive clothes and flashy accessories somehow made me a better person. I watched too many entrepreneurs lose themselves in the pursuit of status symbols, spending their money trying to impress people they didn't even like, living lives that looked perfect on Instagram but felt hollow in reality. I didn't want that. I wanted authenticity, wanted to stay true to the values my parents had taught me. So I wore comfortable clothes most of the time. I drove a reliable car that wasn't trying to make any statements. I lived below my means and invested in experiences rather than things. And until today, I had thought that was working out fine. I had thought that my approach to life and money was healthy and balanced. But today showed me something I hadn't fully appreciated before. No matter how much I believed that appearance didn't matter, the world didn't necessarily agree. Society still judges, still categorizes, still makes assumptions, and those assumptions have real consequences for real people. I found myself sitting on a bench in a small park, watching people pass by, and I started doing something I do whenever I need to process difficult experiences. I started thinking about what I could learn from this, how I could grow, how I could turn something painful into something productive. First lesson: privilege is complex and multifaceted. I had felt the sting of being judged and dismissed today, but I also had the privilege of being able to prove them wrong, to pull out that black card and flip the script. How many people don't have that option? How many people experience the same discrimination, but don't have the financial resources to demand respect? My pain today was real, but it was also temporary and ultimately resolvable. For many others, this kind of treatment is a constant reality with no easy escape. Second lesson: speaking up matters even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. My instinct had been to leave quietly, to avoid confrontation, to just take my business elsewhere and move on with my life. And that would have been the easier choice, no doubt about it. But easy doesn't always mean right. By speaking up, by demanding accountability, by explaining why their behavior was wrong, I potentially prevented the same thing from happening to someone else. I potentially planted seeds of change that might grow into something meaningful. Third lesson: anger can be fuel for positive change if channeled correctly. I had every right to be angry about what happened, and that anger was valid and justified. But anger alone doesn't accomplish anything. It's what you do with that anger that matters. I could have screamed and cursed and made a scene. I could have threatened lawsuits and demanded immediate consequences. But instead, I chose to use my anger as motivation to educate, to explain, to create a teaching moment. That approach might not always work, but today it felt like the right choice. Fourth lesson: the way we dress and present ourselves should be a personal choice, not a requirement for basic human respect. I shouldn't have to dress up to prove that I'm worthy of courteous service. Nobody should. The fact that we live in a society where appearance determines how you're treated is a problem we need to address collectively. I thought about writing a blog post about this experience, about sharing it with my followers and readers who often look to me for thoughts on business culture and entrepreneurship. But then I hesitated. Was that the right move? Would sharing this publicly come across as vindictive or as educational? Would it help create change, or would it just expose the store to internet rage and potentially ruin innocent employees' lives? These questions didn't have easy answers. Social media has power, tremendous power to shine light on injustice and hold people accountable. But it also has the power to destroy, to turn individuals into symbols, to unleash waves of harassment that go far beyond reasonable consequences. I decided that I would think about it more carefully before making any decisions about how public to make this experience. Maybe I would share it without naming the specific store, focusing on the broader issue rather than the particular incident. Maybe I would reach out to Richard directly and see if he followed through on his promises before deciding whether to go public. Or maybe I would keep this moment private, using it as personal fuel for my own growth and advocacy, without turning it into a spectacle. As I sat there contemplating, my phone buzzed again, and this time I looked at it. There was a message from my best friend Maya. "Hey, are you still shopping? Want to grab dinner later and tell me about your big treat yourself day?" I smiled despite everything. Maya always had perfect timing, even when she didn't know it. I typed back, "Dinner sounds perfect. I have quite a story to tell you." She responded with a series of excited emojis and a restaurant suggestion. Just that simple exchange, that reminder of friendship and support, helped ground me. Whatever had happened today, I had people in my life who cared about me, who would listen to my story with sympathy and outrage on my behalf. I wasn't alone. I checked the time and realized that I had been walking and sitting for over an hour since leaving the store. The afternoon was getting late and I still hadn't bought anything for myself or my employees. The original mission had been completely derailed. But you know what? That was okay. Maybe I didn't need retail therapy today. Maybe what I needed was exactly what had happened. A reminder of who I am and what I stand for, a test of my values and my courage, an opportunity to speak truth even when my voice was shaking. I decided to head home, to take a hot shower and wash away the stress of the day, to put on my softest pajamas and curl up with a book until it was time to meet Maya for dinner. Sometimes self-care isn't about buying things or treating yourself to luxury items. Sometimes it's about giving yourself space to process difficult experiences, permission to feel all your feelings, and time to recover from emotional exhaustion. As I walked toward the subway station, I reflected on how this experience would change me moving forward. Would I become more guarded, more defensive, always prepared for judgment and discrimination? Would I start dressing differently to avoid future confrontations, conforming to society's expectations about how wealth should look? Or would I double down on my commitment to authenticity, wearing what made me comfortable and carrying this experience as armor rather than a wound? I knew myself well enough to know it would be the latter. I wasn't going to let one bad experience change my core values or make me compromise on being true to myself. If anything, this would strengthen my resolve to live authentically and to speak up when I saw others being treated unfairly. But I also knew that this experience would stay with me, would inform how I thought about privilege and discrimination, would remind me to be conscious of my own biases and assumptions about others. We all have blind spots, areas where we inadvertently judge or make assumptions. Today, I was on the receiving end of that judgment. But how many times had I been the one making unfair assumptions about someone else? How many times had I let my own biases color my interactions without even realizing it? These were uncomfortable questions to sit with, but important ones. The subway platform was crowded with evening commuters, everyone lost in their own worlds, staring at phones or lost in thought. I found a spot against a pillar and waited for my train, observing the incredible diversity of humanity around me. People of every age, race, background, and yes, every style of dress, all sharing this public space, all heading to their own destinations with their own stories and struggles. The woman next to me was wearing a power suit that probably cost a fortune, her hair and makeup perfect, clearly coming from some high-powered job. Just beyond her was a young man in paint-splattered overalls, probably an artist or contractor heading home after a day of work. There was an elderly man in worn but clean clothes, reading a paperback book with the kind of focus that suggested he was deeply absorbed in the story. A teenage girl in vibrant, eclectic clothes that were definitely thrifted or handmade was listening to music through headphones, bopping her head to a beat only she could hear. Each person valuable, each person worthy of respect, each person with depths and dimensions that couldn't be guessed at from their appearance. That's what Melissa and Richard and people like them don't understand, I thought. When you judge people by their clothes, you're not just being snobbish or elitist. You're diminishing the fundamental humanity of people, reducing complex individuals with rich inner lives to nothing more than their surface presentation. You're missing out on connections, on opportunities, on the chance to see the beauty and diversity of human experience. My train arrived and I squeezed into a middle car, finding a seat near the window. As the train lurched into motion and the station disappeared behind us, I thought about what I would tell Maya at dinner. I would tell her the whole story, of course, holding nothing back. Maya would be outraged on my behalf, would probably want to organize some kind of protest or social media campaign. And I would have to talk her down from that, explain my more measured approach, my belief that change happens through education and engagement rather than just punishment and public shaming. But I would also tell her about the moments of light in the darkness, about the older woman who thanked me for speaking up, about Melissa's tears that seemed genuine, about Richard's promise to implement new training. I would tell her that despite the hurt and anger, I also felt oddly grateful for the experience because it clarified things for me, reminded me of what I stand for and why it matters. The train car was warm and slightly stuffy, the way subway cars always are during rush hour, and I felt my eyelids getting heavy. The adrenaline crash was hitting hard now, and I just wanted to be home, wanted to be in my own space where I felt safe and comfortable and accepted exactly as I was. I thought about my mother and what she would say about today's events. She would be proud that I stood up for myself, but she would also gently remind me to not let bitterness take root in my heart. She would say something like, "Baby, some people just don't know any better, and it's not your job to educate everyone you meet, but I'm glad you spoke your truth today." My mother had always had this incredible ability to be both fierce and compassionate, to demand justice while also extending grace. I hoped I had inherited at least some of that balance from her. I thought about all the employees at my company, the 200+ people whose livelihoods depended on the business I had built. They came from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all socioeconomic statuses. Some had fancy degrees from prestigious universities. Others had taught themselves everything they knew through online courses and determination. Some dressed in professional business attire every day. Others wore jeans and hoodies. And you know what? Their clothing choices had absolutely zero correlation with their talent, their work ethic, or their value to the company. Some of my best engineers wore the same ratty t-shirt for days in a row when they were deep in solving a problem. Some of my most creative designers looked like they had gotten dressed in the dark, and some of my most reliable administrative staff showed up in pressed suits and perfectly coordinated outfits every single day. All equally valuable, all equally worthy of respect and fair treatment. That's the culture I had tried to build at my company, a culture where people were judged by their contributions and their character, not by superficial markers of status or class. And maybe that's why today's experience had hit me so hard. In my own world, in the bubble I had created, those kind of judgments didn't happen. But out there, in the wider world, they happened all the time. I couldn't protect everyone from it, couldn't create a safe bubble that extended beyond my company's walls. But I could speak up when I witnessed it, could use my platform and my voice to advocate for change, could tell my story and hope that it resonated with others who had similar experiences. The train pulled into my stop and I made my way out onto the platform, up the stairs, and onto my familiar street. The walk to my apartment building was short, just a few blocks through a neighborhood I had come to love. I waved to the doorman, Jorge, who greeted me with his usual warm smile and asked how my day was. I almost laughed at the question. How was my day? Complicated, emotional, educational, exhausting, empowering, all of the above and more. But I just said, "It was interesting, Jorge. I'll tell you about it sometime." He nodded knowingly, probably sensing that I wasn't in the mood for small talk, and held the elevator door for me. Inside my apartment, I dropped my bag on the floor, kicked off my sneakers, and went straight to my bedroom. I stood in front of my closet for a moment, looking at all the clothes hanging there, the designer pieces I had bought for important meetings and events mixed in with the comfortable everyday items I actually preferred wearing. I ran my fingers along a particularly expensive dress that I had worn to a gala last year, remembering how many compliments I had received, how effortlessly I had moved through that space, how no one had questioned whether I belonged there. The difference? Just fabric and labels and price tags. The same person inside different clothes, receiving completely different treatment. I changed into my favorite old sweatpants and a soft t-shirt from a company retreat 5 years ago, feeling myself relax as soon as the comfortable fabric touched my skin. This is who I am, I thought. This is authentic me. Not the version in expensive dresses and heels, not the version that plays the game of luxury retail and status symbols, but this version. Comfortable, real, unpretentious me. And that version is just as worthy of respect and dignity as any other version. I made myself a cup of tea and settled onto my couch, pulling a soft blanket over my legs. I thought about checking work emails, about diving back into the projects and deadlines that were waiting for me, but I decided against it. Sometimes you need to just sit with your experiences, need to let them sink in and teach you what they have to teach before rushing back to the busyness of daily life. My phone rang, Maya calling instead of texting. I answered, and before I could even say hello, she said, "Okay, I could tell from your text that something happened. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over before dinner?" Her immediate concern, her instinct to check on me and offer support, made my eyes well up with tears I hadn't realized I had been holding back. Sometimes kindness hits harder than cruelty. Sometimes being reminded that people care about you is more overwhelming than being treated badly. I said, my voice catching slightly, "I'm okay. I promise I'm okay. But yeah, something happened, and I could really use my best friend right now." She said, "I'm coming over. Order some Thai food. I'll be there in 20 minutes. And she hung up before I could protest or say that dinner out was still fine. That's the thing about true friendship. Sometimes your people know what you need better than you know yourself, and they show up without being asked, without needing detailed explanations, just showing up because they love you, and that's what you do for people you love. I ordered our usual from the Thai place down the street, knowing exactly what Maya would want without having to ask. While I waited for both the food and my friend to arrive, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a blog post, not a social media rant, just writing for myself, documenting the experience while it was fresh, getting all my thoughts and feelings down before time could soften them or memory could distort them. I wrote about the looks, the words, the feelings of shock and hurt and anger and ultimately empowerment. I wrote about the complexity of the situation, about the systemic nature of the problem, about my own privilege and blind spots. I wrote about the older woman who thanked me and Melissa's tears and Richard's promises. I wrote until my fingers cramped and my tea got cold, and the doorbell rang announcing both the food and Maya's arrival at almost the same time. Maya came in like a whirlwind of support and indignation, immediately pulling me into a tight hug and then demanding to hear everything while we set out the Thai food on my coffee table. I told her the whole story from beginning to end, watching her face cycle through expressions of disbelief, anger, pride, and solidarity. When I got to the part about pulling out my black card, she actually cheered and pumped her fist in the air. When I described Richard's desperate attempts to make things right, she nodded with satisfaction. And when I explained my decision not to get Melissa fired but instead to try to create a teaching moment, she was quiet for a long time before saying, "That's more grace than I would have shown. But I get it. You're right that firing her doesn't fix the systemic problem." We ate pad thai and talked for hours, the conversation flowing naturally from my experience to broader discussions about class and privilege, about the ways we all make assumptions about others, about how to create real change in a world that seems determined to categorize and judge people. Maya shared her own stories of discrimination and judgment, and we laughed and cried and raged together in the way that only old friends can. At some point, Maya asked the question I had been asking myself all afternoon. So what are you going to do now? Are you going to share this publicly? Write about it? Call them out on social media? I told her I wasn't sure yet, that I was still processing, still deciding what felt right. She nodded and said, "Whatever you decide, I support you, but I will say this. Your voice matters. Your platform gives you the opportunity to highlight issues that a lot of people experience but don't have the reach to talk about. If you do decide to share this, I think it could make a real difference." Her words stayed with me after she left that evening, after the food containers were cleaned up and the apartment was quiet again. I sat at my laptop, staring at the document where I had written everything down, and I thought about what would be most helpful, most impactful, most aligned with my values. I thought about all the people who might read my story and see themselves in it, who might feel less alone in their own experiences of being judged and dismissed. I thought about the store managers and sales associates who might read it and question their own practices and prejudices. I thought about the young people who might read it and feel empowered to speak up when they were treated unfairly. And I made a decision. I would share this story, but not immediately. Not while emotions were still raw and the desire for vindictive justice was still strong. I would wait a few days, let everything settle, see if Richard followed through on his promises. And then I would write about it in a way that focused on the broader issues rather than just the specific incident, that educated rather than just vented, that created space for growth and change rather than just calling for punishment. I would tell my truth, but I would tell it in a way that honored my values and my mother's teachings about combining fierce advocacy with compassionate understanding. The next few days passed in a blur of work and reflection. I threw myself into a new project at the company, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of problem-solving and collaboration. But the experience at the store stayed with me, coloring my interactions and making me more aware of the dynamics of respect and judgment that play out in every interaction. About a week after the incident, I received an unexpected email. It was from Richard, the store manager, and it was longer and more detailed than I would have expected from a corporate apology. He wrote about the changes he had implemented, actual concrete steps rather than vague promises. He had brought in a consultant to conduct training sessions on unconscious bias for all staff. He had revised the store's customer service policies to explicitly prohibit profiling based on appearance. He had created a system for customers to provide anonymous feedback about their experiences. And he included a personal reflection on his own assumptions and blind spots that he was working to address. The email ended with an invitation for me to come back to the store, not for any special treatment or discounts, but simply to see if the changes were real and meaningful. I was surprised by the email, honestly. Part of me had assumed that his promises were just empty words meant to placate me in the moment, that once I left the store, everything would go back to normal. But this email suggested otherwise. It suggested that maybe, just maybe, my speaking up had actually created some real change. I didn't respond to the email immediately. I needed to think about whether I wanted to engage further, whether I wanted to give them a second chance, whether I was ready to potentially open myself up to disappointment if the changes turned out to be superficial rather than substantive. But I also recognized that this was exactly what I had asked for: accountability, education, change. And if Richard was genuinely trying to deliver on those things, then refusing to acknowledge it would be cynical and unfair. After a few days of consideration, I wrote back. I thanked him for the email and for taking the situation seriously. I told him about my own reflections and growth from the experience. And I said that yes, I would consider visiting the store again at some point in the future, when enough time had passed for the changes to really take root and become part of the culture, rather than just a temporary response to a complaint. It felt like the right balance between holding boundaries and remaining open to the possibility of change. As I hit send on that email, I realized something important. This whole experience, painful as it had been, had taught me something valuable about myself and about the world. It had taught me that I have a voice and that my voice matters. It had taught me that speaking up in the face of injustice, even when it's uncomfortable and scary, is worth it. It had taught me that change is possible, even if it's slow and imperfect. It had taught me that grace and accountability can coexist, that we can demand better from people while also giving them room to learn and grow. Most importantly, it had taught me that my worth is inherent and unchangeable, not dependent on how others perceive me or treat me. Whether I'm wearing expensive designer clothes or my favorite old jeans, whether I'm in a luxury store or grocery shopping, whether people judge me positively or negatively, my fundamental value as a human being remains constant. That's a lesson worth learning, even if the learning was painful. So let me ask you something, and I really want you to think about this. Maybe even comment below and share your thoughts with me, and with others who might be going through something similar. Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever been judged unfairly based on your appearance, your accent, your perceived social class, or any other superficial factor? How did you handle it? Did you speak up, or did you walk away quietly? And looking back, how do you feel about how you handled it? Here's what I want you to take away from my story, if nothing else. Your worth is not determined by how others see you. Your value is not measured by your clothes or your car or your address or any other external marker. You are worthy of respect and dignity simply because you are a human being, period. And when someone treats you as less than that, when someone judges you and diminishes you based on superficial factors, that says everything about them and nothing about you. But also understand this: speaking up is not easy. It requires courage, it requires emotional energy, it requires being willing to be uncomfortable and potentially face backlash. So if you've been in situations where you didn't speak up, where you just walked away quietly, I want you to know that's okay too. There's no shame in protecting your peace, in choosing your battles, in deciding that a confrontation isn't worth the emotional cost. We all have to make those calculations in the moment, and whatever choice you made was the right choice for you at that time. What matters is that we learn from these experiences, that we grow, that we become more aware of our own biases, and more committed to treating others with respect, regardless of how they look or present themselves. What matters is that we create a world where fewer people have to go through what I went through, where appearance doesn't determine how you're treated, where dignity and respect are extended to everyone as a baseline, rather than earned through the right clothes or the right accessories. I think a lot about the ripple effects of that day. I think about Melissa, and whether she really changed, or if she just learned to be more careful about her discrimination. I think about Richard, and whether the store's new policies are being implemented meaningfully, or if they're just window dressing. I think about the older woman who thanked me, and whether my speaking up made her more aware of her own privilege, and more likely to speak up when she sees others being treated unfairly. I think about all the people who might have been treated better in that store because of the conversation we had that day. And I think about myself and how this experience changed me. I'm more vigilant now about noticing when people are being judged or dismissed. I'm quicker to speak up when I see injustice. Even small injustices that might seem insignificant, but add up to create a culture of discrimination. I'm more aware of my own privilege, and more intentional about using it to advocate for others who might not have the same resources or platform. But I'm also more protective of my energy and my boundaries. I've learned that you can't fight every battle, can't educate every person who doesn't understand, can't fix every broken system. Sometimes you have to choose which hills to die on, and that's okay. The important thing is that when you do choose to engage, when you do choose to speak up, you do it thoughtfully and intentionally in a way that aligns with your values and has the best chance of creating real change. If you're still reading this, if you've stuck with me through this whole long story, I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in dignity and respect, and treating people as complex human beings rather than stereotypes. And I want to ask you to do something for me. I want you to think about your own life and your own interactions. When was the last time you made an assumption about someone based on their appearance? Be honest with yourself. We all do it. It's human nature to categorize and make snap judgments. But awareness is the first step to change. Once you're aware of your own biases, you can start to question them, to catch yourself in the moment and choose differently. And I want you to commit to treating everyone you encounter with respect and dignity, regardless of how they're dressed or how they present themselves. The person in line at the grocery store, the person serving your coffee, the person asking for directions. Everyone deserves your courtesy and respect. It costs you nothing to be kind, to make eye contact, to acknowledge people's humanity. But for them, it might make their whole day better. It might be the one positive interaction they have in a sea of negative ones. If this story resonated with you, if it touched your heart or made you think or reminded you of your own experiences, please leave a comment below. Share your story, share your thoughts, share what you learned or what questions you still have. Let's create a conversation, a real dialogue about these issues that affect so many of us. And if you appreciated me sharing this vulnerable, personal story with you, if you think this is the kind of content that matters and deserves to be seen by more people, please hit that like button. It really does help more people find this content. And the more people who hear this message, the more likely we are to create real change in how we treat each other. Finally, if you want to hear more stories like this, more honest conversations about life and dignity and standing up for yourself and others, please subscribe to my Truth Revealed Tales. This channel is all about sharing real experiences, real emotions, real struggles and triumphs. It's about being vulnerable and authentic and creating space for all of us to learn and grow together. And make sure you hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this community. Remember, you are worthy exactly as you are, and never let anyone make you feel otherwise. Until next time, keep speaking your truth and keep treating others with the dignity and respect we all deserve.